In the dark silence of the Pacific, a U.S. Navy ship vanishes without a trace. Hundreds of sailors left floating in deadly waters, surrounded by sharks, heat, and fear. No one knows they're missing. No one is coming. What secret did they carry, and why were they left to die? The sky over San Francisco was clear the morning Tommy Albrecht, stepped onto the deck of the USS Indianapolis. He paused for a moment, his sea bag over one shoulder, looking up at the towering ship that would carry him thousands of miles from home. Just 20 years old, fresh out of training, and full of quiet excitement, Tommy still had the easy grin of a boy from Milwaukee, but his eyes held the restless energy of a young man who hadn't yet seen war, but knew it was never far away. Tommy had spent his childhood near the Great Lakes, where his father worked at a steel plant. His older brother had gone to Europe the year before, and their letters were filled with vague reassurances and blank spaces where the real stories were supposed to be. Tommy had enlisted in 1944, wanting to do his part. After training, a string of temporary assignments brought him here, to the massive cruiser docked in the heart of California's war industry. The Indianapolis wasn't just another ship. It had a reputation, strong, fast, battle-tested, and now it had a mission. It was late July 1945, and though news from Europe brought talk of peace, the war in the Pacific dragged on. Rumors passed between sailors like whispers carried by wind. An invasion of Japan was coming, one that would be long and costly. Nobody said it out loud, but most knew the fighting wasn't finished yet. When Tommy boarded the ship, he expected the usual routines, drills, watches, maybe some nervous jokes about seasickness or the length of the journey. Instead, there was tension in the air that he couldn't quite explain. Officers moved with a briskness that didn't match the usual calm before departure. Conversation stopped when certain people walked by. Even the older sailors seemed unusually quiet. Tommy was assigned to a forward living space near the bow. His bunk was wedged above another new sailor, a quiet man from North Carolina, who went by the name Elliot Drew. They spoke in short bursts as they unpacked their gear, but both seemed more focused on observing the behavior of the crew around them. Their first meal aboard was strangely silent. Normally the mess hall was where the young sailors laughed too loudly and swapped stories from home. This time, it felt like everyone was waiting for something to happen. At the far end of the table, an older petty officer leaned in and muttered, "Don't ask too many questions on this run." He didn't smile. "Just keep your head down and do what you're told." That night, the Indianapolis slipped out of the harbor with no fanfare, no band playing, no crowd waving goodbye, just the silent groan of ropes and the slow churn of water as the ship turned west, heading toward the deep Pacific. Tommy stood on the edge of the deck, watching the coastline fade into the mist. Something about the silence struck him as strange. He had imagined departure to be filled with noise, orders shouted, men laughing, maybe even a glimpse of the Golden Gate Bridge, disappearing behind them. But now, all he could hear was the hum of the engines, and the crash of water against the hull. A day into the voyage, whispers started to ripple through the lower decks. Some claimed the ship was carrying top brass, others said it was a resupply mission for a base closer to the front. But no one really knew. Tommy caught part of a hushed conversation between two machinists. One of them mentioned heavy crates being loaded in San Francisco, surrounded by men who weren't in uniform. Another spoke of locked compartments and sealed documents. Tommy tried to brush it off. After all, secrecy wasn't unusual on warships. Still, something didn't sit right. The officers seemed more alert than usual. Even Lieutenant James Raines, one of the friendlier faces among the leadership, had stopped joking with the younger sailors. His steps were quicker, his eyes sharper. One evening Tommy caught Raines staring at a map in the hallway, tapping it with the back of his pen, lost in thought. The days passed in a kind of quiet urgency. Tommy spent hours in drills, cleaning gear, and taking watch, but the usual sense of routine never settled in. He noticed how often the crew checked and rechecked their assignments. It was as if everyone was preparing for something without being told what it was. On the fourth day at sea, just after sunset, Tommy was sitting with Elliot near the stern, enjoying the cooler air. Elliot leaned closer and asked, "You ever wonder what we're really carrying?" Tommy nodded slowly. "Yeah, I don't think it's just mail and spare parts." They both sat in silence for a moment, watching the orange glow disappear beneath the waves. Then Elliot added, almost as a whisper, "I think we're part of something big, and I'm not sure if that's good or bad." Tommy didn't answer right away. He just stared out into the dark, the sea stretching endlessly before them, and felt a weight settle in his chest that he couldn't explain. It was a feeling he would remember for the rest of his life. Because deep below those calm waves, another force was watching, silent, patient, waiting. And the mission they were on, whatever it truly was already halfway to changing history. The USS Indianapolis reached Tinian Island just as the sun broke over the horizon, casting streaks of golden light across the calm Pacific. The island itself seemed quiet, like a place caught between the tension of war and the stillness of morning. For Tommy Albrecht, it felt strange to finally reach a destination without understanding what their mission had truly been. Docking was fast, almost too fast. Within minutes, uniformed Marines were already standing by the loading bays, lined in a tight formation. They weren't relaxed like most ground crews Tommy had seen. These men were stiff, alert, and spoke in short, clipped tones. Their eyes kept sweeping the area, as if expecting something to go wrong. Tommy watched from the deck as large crates were wheeled off the ship. Each one was surrounded by guards who never let their hands stray far from their belts. There were no markings on the cargo, nothing to say where it had come from or what it contained. He leaned over the rail beside Elliot Drew, squinting at the scene below. "You see that?" Elliot murmured. Tommy nodded. "It's like they're guarding gold." Elliot gave a low whistle. "Or something worse." The crates disappeared into a convoy of trucks within minutes, and that was it. No ceremony, no celebration, no confirmation of what they had just delivered. The crew wasn't given time to stretch their legs or rest. The ship didn't even anchor overnight. Orders came down within the hour. They were to sail for Leyte Gulf immediately. No escort, no support, just open ocean ahead. As the Indianapolis pulled away from Tinian, Tommy felt an odd sense of emptiness. They had completed something important, of that he was sure, but there was no talk of it, no pats on the back, just silence and more ocean. The mission, whatever it had been, was over, and now they were just a group of sailors floating between islands, unaware that the danger hadn't passed. The crew was tired. The heat had settled in heavy that week, and the ship had begun to creak and groan from the constant movement and humidity. Below decks, men spoke in murmurs, fanning themselves with scrap paper and playing cards in tight circles. Morale hovered somewhere between boredom and relief. With their mysterious delivery behind them, many figured the worst was over. A few even believed they might be heading home soon. Tommy sat with Elliot one evening in the mess, sipping weak coffee that had gone lukewarm. Elliot stretched his arms behind his head and gave a half smile. "Maybe we'll get to Ley, pick up some mail and get rotated out," he said. "My sister said she was baking me a whole batch of cookies." Tommy smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You ever get that feeling something's coming, even when everything looks fine?" Elliot lowered his voice. "Yeah, I've had that since Tinian." They didn't say anything else. A few sailors laughed from another table, swapping stories about home, about jukeboxes and dances and cold drinks. Tommy tried to imagine himself back in Milwaukee, walking along the riverfront or sitting with his family on the back porch. But even in his mind, the colors felt distant. Later that night, Tommy wandered up to the deck alone. The sea shimmered under the stars, calm and beautiful. He gripped the railing and stared out at the horizon, trying to shake off the strange tightness in his chest. Behind him, footsteps approached. It was Lieutenant James Raines, looking tired but composed. "Can't sleep?" the officer asked. Tommy shook his head. "Just needed air, sir." Raines stepped beside him, looking out at the stars. "We did something important back there, Albrecht. That's all I'll say." Tommy glanced at him. "Was it dangerous?" Raines didn't answer right away. "Let's just say, the world might change because of what we delivered." With that, he patted Tommy's shoulder and walked off into the shadows of the upper deck. Tommy stood there for a long time, his hands tightening around the rail. The night felt too still, the stars too quiet, and somewhere beneath the surface, the ocean seemed to breathe slow and wide, like it was waiting. Back below deck, the ship moved steadily on, cutting through the water at full speed. The engines hummed with mechanical rhythm, giving the illusion of progress and control. Most of the crew slept soundly, unaware that they were passing through one of the most dangerous stretches of water in the Pacific. What none of them knew, what even the senior officers didn't fully realize, was that the next leg of the journey would be their most perilous yet. They were alone in the dark, halfway between two islands, with no protection and no one tracking their path. Tommy lay in his bunk that night, eyes wide open, listening to the sound of metal groaning gently above him. He thought of the crates, the guards, and the silence. And for the first time since boarding the ship, he felt something close to fear. It crept in like a whisper and refused to leave. The night of July 30th wrapped the USS Indianapolis in heavy stillness. The sky above was clear, dotted with stars, and the sea stretched out endlessly in all directions, calm and seemingly harmless. The moon's faint glow shimmered across the surface, giving the illusion of peace. Below deck, most of the crew had already turned in for the night. The hum of the engines provided a steady rhythm like a lullaby for tired minds. Tommy Albrecht lay on his bunk, arms behind his head, staring at the ceiling above him. Sleep had been hard to come by lately. There was something about the quiet of this particular voyage that didn't sit right with him. No escort, no radio contact, just water, darkness, and the ghost of a mission no one would speak about. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine Milwaukee again, the sound of streetcars, the smell of his mother's Sunday roast, the laughter of his younger brother chasing fireflies in the yard. He didn't know why, but the memory felt distant, like a picture starting to fade at the edges. Then, without warning, the ship shuddered violently. The entire structure seemed to lurch sideways, as if struck by an invisible hand. The lights above flickered, a deep, thunderous boom followed, reverberating through the steel walls like the roar of an angry storm. Tommy was on his feet before he could think, heart pounding. Another explosion erupted, closer, stronger. The floor tilted sharply. Cries began to echo through the corridors, confused, urgent, rising in panic. "What was that?" Elliot's voice rang out from across the bunk room, alarmed. Before Tommy could answer, the room jerked again. A metallic screech tore through the ship like steel being ripped open from the inside. The lights cut out completely. Men scrambled from their beds, pulling on boots, slamming into walls as the floor tilted further. Smoke began to drift in from the hallway, followed by heat, intense, choking heat. Someone yelled, "Get topside," but it was hard to tell who or where they were. Tommy staggered through the smoke, hand to the wall, trying to find the exit. The passageway outside was chaos. Flames licked at the edges of the lower deck, casting long shadows on the faces of men who ran, limped, or stumbled toward the stairs. One man was trying to help another up from the floor, both coughing, eyes wide with terror. There were no clear orders, no direction, just noise, screaming metal, shouting voices, and the roar of fire swallowing parts of the ship. Reaching the upper deck was like breaking the surface of water after nearly drowning. Cool air hit Tommy's face, but it was laced with smoke. The sky above was still full of stars, but down here, everything was falling apart. The Indianapolis was listing hard to the right. Fire burst from near the bow, and a huge section of the midship was torn open, twisted like paper. Water surged onto the deck as the sea rushed in through the wounds. Pieces of debris flew through the air. Metal shards, wood, storage crates. Tommy heard someone call out his name. He turned, caught a glimpse of Elliot pushing through the crowd, and then the deck beneath him exploded. The blast wasn't loud. It was all pressure and light. It lifted him off his feet and hurled him into the air. The sound vanished. The sky spun. Then came the cold. Icy seawater swallowed him whole. For a second he didn't know which way was up. He kicked, arms flailing, lungs burning. Finally, he broke the surface, gasping, choking on salt water. The ship loomed above him, still ablaze, still sinking fast. Alarms blared somewhere in the distance, muffled by the water. Tommy clung to a floating crate, coughing, his body shaking. All around him, other sailors bobbed in the waves, some calling out, others silent. The heat from the ship's fire clashed with the coldness of the sea. Smoke rolled out in heavy clouds, blotting out the stars above. In the span of minutes, everything had changed. Through the smoke and flickers of firelight, Tommy could see the Indianapolis slipping deeper into the ocean. A massive groan echoed across the water, steel collapsing under its own weight. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. He could only watch, frozen, as the ship that had carried them across half the world disappeared into the dark. 12 minutes. That was all it took. 12 minutes to go from steel giant to twisted wreckage beneath the sea. Tommy drifted in stunned silence. The waves slapped against his face, salt stinging his eyes. Around him voices rose, some calling out for help, others calling for loved ones. He clung tighter to the crate, his fingers numb. The smell of oil hung heavy in the air, coating the surface of the water like a blanket. A thick, haunting silence followed, as the last of the Indianapolis vanished beneath the waves. Roughly 900 sailors were now stranded in the middle of the Pacific, floating in the open sea with no rescue in sight. Tommy's heart pounded in his ears. He turned in the water, scanning the darkness for familiar faces. "Elliot!" he cried hoarsely. "Elliot!" No answer. He saw shapes, heads bobbing, arms reaching for debris. Some clung to wooden planks or small rafts. Others floated silently, eyes wide with shock. For the first time in his life, Tommy truly understood what it meant to be alone. The ocean stretched in every direction, black and endless. The stars above offered no comfort, only distance, only the realization that they were now part of a tragedy no one had seen coming. The weight of it hit him all at once. Not just the cold, not just the fear, but the simple, awful truth. No one knew they were out here. No distress call had gone out, no backup was coming, and dawn was still hours away. Tommy tightened his grip on the crate and pulled his knees to his chest. He tried to think, to remember his training, but his thoughts kept spiraling home. His parents, his brother, the silence of the stars. Floating next to him, another sailor whispered, "We're still alive. That has to mean something." Tommy turned to him, blinking away the salt. "What's your name?" "Cameron," the sailor said, breath shallow. "Walter Cameron, from Georgia." Tommy nodded. "Tommy Albrecht, Wisconsin." The two of them drifted side by side, surrounded by pieces of what once was. Shouts rose and fell around them. The ocean rolled on, and in the distance the night grew quieter, as if holding its breath for what would come next. The horizon slowly turned from black to gray, then finally to blue. Morning light peeled away the darkness like a curtain, revealing the truth they had all hoped was just a nightmare. But it wasn't. The sun rose over the Pacific, casting gold across the waves. The sea seemed calm again, deceptively so, but floating among that stillness were hundreds of men, scattered as far as Tommy could see. Some clung to bits of wood or cargo nets, others floated quietly on their backs, eyes half closed under the glare of daylight. Tommy rubbed his face with trembling hands, trying to wipe the salt from his eyes. His clothes were soaked and stiff with dried seawater, his skin raw from hours in the ocean. His throat ached with thirst, and every inch of him felt sunburned. He hadn't slept. No one really had. Between the fear, the pain, and the constant movement of the waves, sleep felt like something that belonged to another world entirely. Nearby, a voice called out, "Over here." Tommy turned his head and saw a small group drifting not far off. He kicked weakly through the water, gripping his crate as he made his way closer. The group had gathered around a half-inflated life net, barely enough to support them, but better than nothing. The first person he saw was a man with a cloth wrapped around his head. His face was pale but his eyes sharp. "Lieutenant Raines," the man introduced himself hoarsely. "You all right, son?" Tommy nodded. "As all right as any of us, I guess." The others nodded quietly. One was a boy who couldn't have been older than 16, freckles across his cheeks and arms. His name was Alan. Beside him floated a sailor named Becker, whose glasses were cracked but still hung onto his nose, and gripping the net with both arms was Luis Ortega, the ship's cook. His arms were wrapped in a shirt soaked from the ocean, his skin raw from heat and salt, but his eyes were kind. "Got room for one more?" Tommy asked. "Always," Ortega said with a weak smile. Tommy settled in beside them, grateful for the company. The presence of other voices, even if tired or strained, made the silence a little more bearable. As the sun climbed higher, the heat grew fierce. They had no shade, no protection. Skin blistered, lips cracked. Every breath felt heavier than the last. A few had managed to keep their canteens, but the water inside was warm and nearly gone. The sea stretched out endlessly, unbroken by sails, planes, or signs of land. "We should have been found by now," Becker murmured. "Maybe they just haven't figured out we're missing," Alan offered, though his tone was unsure. "We weren't due to report for another few days," Rain said quietly. "They might not know." Tommy felt his stomach twist. That thought hadn't struck him until now, that no one might even be looking yet. "We delivered the cargo," Rains continued, more to himself than anyone else. "We did our job, whatever it was. That has to mean something." Tommy remembered the way the Marines had moved so quickly at Tinian, their faces locked in silence, guarding the mysterious crates with unusual caution. He'd never seen cargo get unloaded like that. Now, sitting under the hot sun with his skin burning and lips cracking, he wondered what it was all for. Ortega shifted beside him. You think maybe someone saw the explosions? If they did, they haven't come, Rains said simply. A silence settled over the group again. By midday the sea had grown warmer, but something else changed too, something harder to explain. The water beneath them felt alive. Not just waves and current, but movement. Occasional bumps, a splash too close, the kind of things that prickled the skin without showing anything above the surface. Tommy was the first to notice the fins. He didn't say anything at first, just squinted, blinked, looked again. Long dark shapes slid just under the waves, moving in slow, lazy circles. A few others began to notice too. Eyes widened. Alan pulled his knees to his chest, floating tighter against the net. They're just curious, Ortega whispered. Maybe, Tommy said, watching closely. The fins never came too close, but they never left either. By now the water had a rhythm to it. The swell, the heat, the weight of the air pressing down on them. Time seemed to bend. The sun stood still, high above, with no sign of cloud cover. Even the voices around them grew fainter. Men further out began to drift away, not physically but mentally, lost in memories or exhaustion. Some talked to themselves, others mumbled names of people who weren't there. Tommy kept close to Ortega, who had begun telling stories between sips of the little water they had. Funny ones about how he'd once spilled soup on an officer's boots, or how he'd learned to cook not from his mother, but from a street vendor in San Antonio. The stories made them smile, even laugh a little. It helped just enough to feel human again. By the afternoon, Rains gathered them closer. We keep each other in sight, he said firmly. No drifting, no panic, and no losing hope. What about the sharks? Alan asked. We stay still, stay calm. We don't give them a reason. The boy nodded, but his face betrayed the fear growing inside him. They all felt it, the way the water seemed to watch them back, the way those shapes never went far. But still, there had been no attacks. Maybe it was luck, maybe it was something else. Either way, they were still floating, still breathing, still together. And somehow, in the middle of the worst moment of their lives, that counted for something. That first day ended slowly, the sun dipping toward the horizon. The light softened, the water cooled slightly, and the sky began to shift back toward orange. Still no planes, no rescue, nothing. Just more silence, more ocean. Tommy leaned back against the crate, his muscles stiff, his mind racing. He thought of his family again, of his father's voice on the porch, of warm summers in Milwaukee. The memories kept him sane, gave him something to hold on to. As the light began to fade and stars slowly emerged overhead, he whispered quietly, "We're going to make it, we have to." Ortega didn't respond, but he gave Tommy's shoulder a gentle pat. It said more than words ever could. They floated on, under the stars, surrounded by water shadows in the quiet fight to survive another day. The second day began, not with the warmth of sunlight, but with a scream. Tommy jolted awake, or maybe he hadn't really been asleep at all. The line between rest and exhaustion was blurring. He looked around, heart thudding. In the dim morning light, shapes moved in panic. Water splashed. Men shouted. Something was happening. A moment later he saw it just feet away. A sailor vanished beneath the surface, with a sharp jerk, as if yanked from below. The sea around the spot frothed and churned. Then it went still. Silence followed, heavy and stunned. Eyes darted across the water, searching. Then another scream. Another splash. Another sailor gone. No, 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 someone cried out, paddling backward in blind panic. Stay together, Letta. Rain shouted, his voice firm, almost angry. Don't thrash. Stay still. But the fear was already spreading faster than his orders. All around them, the ocean seemed to come alive. No longer just a vast space, but a threat. Dark fins sliced through the water like silent blades. The movement was swift, sudden, unpredictable. They were surrounded. Tommy's grip on the crate tightened. He felt the current shift around his legs, and kicked gently to stay upright. Beside him, Ortega was whispering something under his breath. Maybe a prayer or a memory. His face was pale, and the burns on his arms looked worse in the new light. Then came the moment Tommy would never forget. He felt a tug in the water near his leg, and before he could react, Ortega let out a cry. In a blink, something powerful yanked him from the group. Tommy reached out too late. His fingertips brushed Ortega's arm, but he was already sliding under the surface. "Ortega!" Tommy screamed. Rain shouted for calm. trying to keep the others from swimming after him, but the horror had already set in. Tommy stared at the water where his friend had been, heart pounding, his voice gone. Bubbles rose, then nothing. The cook who had kept them sane with stories was gone. Tommy went quiet after that. So did the rest of them. Shock hung heavy in the air. No one spoke for a long time. The sea, as if satisfied, calmed again. The fins disappeared, the surface still, but the fear remained. The sun climbed slowly overhead, brighter and hotter than the day before. There were no clouds, no shade, no relief. Tommy's skin was peeling, his lips cracked. The water they had was long gone. He tried not to think about how dry his throat felt, or how dizzy he was becoming. Around midday, the hallucinations began. At first it was small, just shadows in the sky that weren't there, or the illusion of land far off in the distance. Tommy blinked hard trying to clear his vision, but the sun was relentless, and the heat made everything shimmer. Becker muttered something about seeing a rescue ship. He pointed toward the horizon, his cracked glasses sliding down his nose. "There," he whispered. "You see it? They're waving." "There's nothing there, Becker," Rain said gently. But Becker kept insisting. He started paddling toward the image, slow and certain. "Come back," Alan said, his voice shaking. "Please, it's just water." Becker paused, eyes narrowing, then he turned back toward them, confused. "You sure?" he asked, blinking. Rains nodded. "I'm sure." Becker drifted back, weak and silent. That wasn't the worst of it. Later in the afternoon, one of the older sailors, Petty Officer Briggs, who had been floating quietly nearby for most of the day, started laughing. It was a strange, dry sound. At first Tommy thought he was trying to cheer them up, but Briggs wasn't looking at anyone. He stared at the sky and then dipped his hands into the ocean, drinking. "Don't stop," Rains called out, kicking toward him. "Don't drink that." Briggs didn't listen. He took another sip, smiling. "Coolest water I've ever had," he said with a chuckle. "Sweet too." "Briggs," Tommy said carefully, "that's seawater. It's not safe." But it was already too late. The older sailor's expression was glassy, distant. He began paddling in circles, muttering to himself. "I saw them," he whispered. "They're on the beach. They said to come." "There's no beach," Rain said, now more forceful. Briggs smiled again, then turned and started swimming away from the group, slowly at first, then faster. "No," Alan cried, but no one could catch him. Briggs kept going until his head was just a dot bobbing up and down in the waves. Then he was gone. No splash, no sound. Tommy stared at the place where he had vanished. He felt hollow, numb. The ocean had taken another, not just the sharks, the sun, the silence, the waiting. It was like the sea was slowly unraveling them, one thread at a time. They spent the rest of the day in silence, conserving energy, floating close together. Rains did what he could, reminding them to stay calm, to keep their eyes open, to stay still, but even he looked worn now. His voice cracked more often, his movements were slower. Alan drifted closer to Tommy and leaned against the same crate. "I don't want to end like that," the boy said softly. "You won't," Tommy replied, though he wasn't sure what made him say it. "You promise?" Tommy didn't answer right away. He looked out at the horizon, scanning for anything. Wings, smoke, sails, anything. But there was only the golden shimmer of ocean and sky. "We're still here," he said at last. "We're still together." Night came again, without fanfare. The sun dipped below the waves and the cool air returned. It was a small relief, but the silence returned too. And in the darkness, the sharks circled again. No one said a word, they just listened, to the water, to the wind, to their own hearts beating, hoping they could hold out one more night. And Tommy, still clutching the crate, whispered Ortega's name once more before sleep finally claimed him. By the third day, the ocean was no longer just a place of survival. It had become a place of suspicion, whispers, and unraveling minds. Tommy could feel the shift before anyone spoke it aloud. The way Becker looked at him longer, harder, as if studying something hidden. Alan barely made eye contact. Even Rains, though still trying to keep the group steady, spoke less and stared into the distance more often, lost in thought. The sun had returned with full force, beating down like a hammer, and the waves slapped against them with a rhythm that almost mocked their suffering. The hallucinations came quicker now, more vivid, more cruel. Becker whispered that he saw a boat, then an island, then his mother waving. Each time he pointed, only the empty horizon stared back. Tommy had given up scanning for planes. Every time he squinted toward the sky and thought he saw a shadow, it turned out to be nothing more than a bird or a drifting cloud. Hope had started to feel like a trick of the light. Just before midday, the paranoia spilled over. "Where's your water?" Becker hissed suddenly right in Tommy's face. His eyes were wide. "Why? What?" Tommy asked, startled. "You've been hiding it, I see it. Your lips aren't as dry. You're keeping something from us." "That's not true," Tommy said, raising his hands trying to calm him. "I haven't had any. We all ran out the first day." Becker didn't hear him or didn't care. He lunged. Tommy felt himself dragged underwater, Becker's hands pushing down on his shoulders, forcing him under. Panic surged as water rushed into his nose. His eyes stung with salt, and his limbs thrashed. Suddenly, a pair of arms yanked Becker off him. Tommy surfaced, gasping, coughing, clutching the crate. Alan and Rains held Becker back. "Stop it," Rains barked, barely able to keep his balance in the waves. Becker struggled a moment longer, then broke down, sobbing. "I just want a drink," he mumbled, over and over. "I just want a drink." No one said anything after that. The group floated in silence, shaken and exhausted. Tommy drifted slightly apart, not by choice but because he couldn't stay still. His arms and legs ached, but his mind was worse. He kept seeing his brother's face. Jacob had been older by 4 years, always steady, always certain. He had joined the army before Tommy could even think about enlisting, and they hadn't seen each other since. The last letter Tommy received was months ago, full of jokes and stories from Italy, but then the letter stopped. Tommy never got the full answer, only the kind of silence that said everything. He closed his eyes now, trying to remember the sound of Jacob's voice. "Keep your head up, little brother. We Albrecht boys are made of steel." He repeated it to himself like a chant, over and over, every time a wave hit, every time a fin passed too close, every time he saw someone disappear from the corner of his eye. That afternoon the sharks returned in full. It started with a splash. One man, several yards away, suddenly gone, then another. The shadows beneath the surface multiplied, slicing back and forth. The water, once so still, became a blur of movement and fear. Rains called out, trying to keep the group tight. "Don't separate, stay close, stay calm." But calm wasn't possible anymore. Every splash made them flinch. Every bump against a foot sent a jolt of panic through the group. Men clung to each other, eyes darting. Then it happened. One of the younger sailors in their group, Parks, drifted too far. He wasn't even far in distance, just outside the invisible line of safety. Suddenly a dark shape surged toward him. Before it could reach him, Rains kicked into action. He pushed off his crate and swam hard, closing the distance in seconds. With one arm he shoved Parks back toward the group. With the other he tried to fend off the shape moving in the water. There was a flash of movement. A moment later, Rains was floating again, but something was wrong. His face was twisted in pain. He clutched his leg and gritted his teeth. "Lieutenant," Tommy shouted, swimming toward him. Rains shook his head. "I'm fine. Get Parks. Keep him close." But it was clear he wasn't fine. He wouldn't say what had happened. He didn't need to. They all saw the mark something had gotten him during the scramble. They formed a tighter circle after that, ropes from crates tied together, arms linked. The ocean had turned them into something fragile, like a group of leaves floating on the wind, trying not to scatter. As night began to fall, the air cooled again, but the tension didn't. The group was quieter now, broken not just by loss, but by mistrust. No one blamed Tommy for the earlier outburst. But everyone looked at each other differently now. Every movement was watched, every word carefully spoken. Tommy stayed close to Rains. "You should rest," he said softly. "I can't," Rains replied, wincing. "Not until we're out of this." Tommy nodded. "You saved him, Parks. You didn't think twice." Rains shrugged. "We don't leave our own." They floated on in silence for a while, watching the stars appear, one by one. The sky was clearer than Tommy had ever seen it. Millions of tiny lights blinking above them, like eyes keeping watch. Alan murmured a prayer under his breath. Becker, quiet now, kept staring at the sky, whispering names no one else knew. Parks held onto his shirt with shaking fingers, refusing to drift more than an inch away from the others. Tommy stared at the stars and thought of Milwaukee, of his brother, of his parents waiting for news. He didn't know what day it was anymore. He didn't know how many more they could survive. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to give up. Not tonight. The fourth day on the endless ocean felt heavier than the ones before. The sun rose with a pale, tired glow, casting weak light over the scattered forms, drifting silently in the water. The air was still, thick with a strange quiet that seemed to press down on Tommy's chest. During the night, more had slipped away without a sound. No cries, no struggle, just a fading presence lost to the vast sea. The survivors barely had the strength to notice before they were gone. Tommy kept drifting alongside the small group that had formed. Lutton Rains, Alan Becker Parks, but this morning a new face was added to the quiet list. Jackie Moon. He was barely 17. One of the youngest sailors Tommy had met on board. He had held on to Tommy's crate since the sinking, his face pale but stubborn. That morning, Tommy found Jackie's grip slack, his eyes glassy and distant. "Jackie," Tommy whispered, gripping his hand gently. The boy's lips moved slowly, almost like a prayer. "Tell my mother," I tried, Jackie said weakly. His voice barely carried over the gentle waves. "I tried to swim, but the water was too much." Tommy swallowed hard, eyes stinging. "I'll tell her, Jackie. I promise." The boy's eyes closed and the grip on Tommy's hand faded. Tommy held tight for a moment longer, as if trying to hold Jackie's spirit back from slipping away. But the ocean took him in its silent, endless embrace. The loss hit Tommy harder than any of the previous days. It wasn't just the weight of so many gone. It was the way Jackie's words echoed in his mind. "I tried." A simple, desperate hope to survive. A small act of courage swallowed by the sea. Guilt tightened around Tommy's heart. He thought about how Jackie had trusted him in those last moments, how his promise now felt like a fragile thread holding on to something that might break any second. The sun climbed higher, baking their skin and burning away whatever strength they had left. Tommy's mind began to drift, images flickering at the edges of his vision, shapes that weren't there, sounds just beyond hearing. He thought he saw land. At first it was a faint outline, like a trick of the light or a cruel joke. But the more he stared, the more real it seemed. A shadow of green on the horizon, breaking the endless blue of the ocean and sky. He blinked hard. It disappeared. Tommy shook his head, trying to clear the haze. His thoughts were slipping like sand through fingers. The heat, the thirst, the endless waiting. It was wearing him down. He wanted to believe in that land, in rescue, in survival. But the hopelessness was seeping in, slow and dark. Lutton Rains noticed Tommy's silence. "Hold on, Tommy. We're still here. We're still fighting." Tommy nodded, but the words felt distant. Then, like a fragile thread stretching across the sky, a plane appeared. A small speck at first, growing larger, wings cutting through the air above the endless sea. The group stiffened. For a moment hope exploded like a spark inside them. Hands reached out, waving, shouting, splashing. "Hey, over here," Tommy yelled, voice hoarse. But the plane kept flying. It passed overhead, eyes not seeing the desperate figures below. Tommy's heart sank. The distant hum faded into silence again. Rains looked at the plane's disappearing shape, his jaw tight. "We're still here," he said, almost to himself. But the quiet that followed was crushing. The fourth day dragged on, the ocean stretching in every direction, like a vast prison. Each survivor felt the weight of all they had lost. The men who vanished overnight, the boy who had given up, the hope that came and went with a passing plane. Tommy looked out at the waves, the endless blue, and wondered how much longer he could hold on. But deep inside, somewhere beneath the exhaustion and despair, a small part of him still whispered, "Don't give up." The fifth day dawned with the same heavy weight that had settled over Tommy and the others, but somewhere beyond the endless horizon, something was stirring. The U.S. patrol plane was flying over the vast expanse of the Pacific, scanning the water for signs of enemy ships or any trouble. Lieutenant Chuck Gwynn sat at the controls, eyes sharp and focused. Suddenly, something caught his attention, a strange shimmer on the water surface. At first he thought it might be a shadow or a trick of the light, but as he drew closer the grim truth became clear. A wide slick of oil spread across the waves, dotted with drifting bodies and debris. Gwynn's heart raced. This was no ordinary sight. He quickly reached for his radio and sent a steady call for help. His voice was calm but urgent, passing on the coordinates and details to the nearest rescue units. Back below, Tommy barely registered the sounds around him. His body was weak, worn down by thirst, sun and exhaustion. The salt water stung his lips, but he didn't dare drink more, knowing it could only make things worse. Still, through the haze of fatigue, a faint, Distant sound reached him, the unmistakable hum of an aircraft engine. He lifted his head slowly, squinting toward the bright blue sky. Then, like a fragile promise, he saw it, a small seaplane cutting through the air, its wingtip dipping gently as it circled overhead. For the first time in days, hope sparked inside Tommy's heart. His voice, barely a whisper, carried across the water. "It's here, they're coming." Around him, other sailors caught sight of the plane too. Weak cheers rose, soft at first, then stronger, as the survivors realized they had not been forgotten. The sharks, still gliding beneath the surface, moved cautiously now, some circling but fewer daring to approach so boldly. The sailors, sensing the shift in their fortune, found a small burst of strength to cling tighter, to stay together. Lieutenant Gwynn kept his eyes locked on the scene below. He radioed again, making sure rescue teams knew exactly where to head. Slowly, the distant sound of engines grew louder, boats rushing through the waves, drawing closer with each passing moment. Tommy closed his eyes briefly, feeling a strange mix of relief and disbelief. After days of fighting despair, the nightmare might finally be ending. Somewhere deep inside, he promised himself he would survive. For Jackie. For the others. For all of them lost to the sea. And now, a new chapter was about to begin. The sea was rough, that day, restless and unpredictable, but the PBY Catalina seaplane touched down on the choppy waters, with steady grace. Its arrival brought a sudden, sharp change to the endless suffering below. The crew aboard the plane wasted no time, lowering nets and ropes, pulling survivors from the ocean's cold grip one by one. Tommy drifted near the edge of consciousness, his body a fragile shell, worn thin by thirst, sun, and the long days of fear. His skin was raw and tight, a patchwork of sunburns and salt. His clothes hung loosely on him, and his eyes, once bright with youth, now seemed hollow and distant. Somehow, through the haze of pain and exhaustion, he felt himself being lifted. Hands grasped him firmly but gently, hauling him onto the plane's deck. The hard surface beneath his body was unfamiliar and strange, but it was dry and solid. He was one of the last to be pulled from the water, and he barely recognized the faces around him. Sailors he had known from the ship, survivors who had clung to life alongside him. There was a quiet, fragile joy in their reunion. A few smiles, tired but thankful, some soft words of comfort, but beneath the relief was a deeper sadness. Not everyone had made it. Tommy's gaze fell on Lieutenant Rains, sitting nearby with a bandaged arm and a tired expression. The officer's eyes met Tommy's briefly, a faint, sad smile crossing his face. It was clear the injuries had taken a toll that even the rescue couldn't undo. As the plane prepared to lift off, the crew gathered to move Lieutenant Rains to safety. But just as he was being helped aboard, his strength gave out. He slumped back, breathing shallow. The fight finally over. Tommy watched helplessly as Rains was gently laid down. The man who had been their leader, their anchor in the darkest hours, was gone. A wave of grief crashed over Tommy. His body shook with quiet sobs, the weight of all they had endured pressing down on him. The pain of loss mingled with the fragile hope that they had all just been given. Around him, the other survivors shared their own grief, their own relief, their own exhaustion. The sea was behind them now, but the memories, the scars would remain. For Tommy, the rescue was both an ending and a beginning. The nightmare was over, but healing both of body and soul was just starting. And as the plane climbed toward home, toward safety, he held on to a simple, fierce promise: to survive, to remember, and to live. Tommy woke slowly, blinking against the harsh light of a field hospital somewhere in the Philippines. The world felt strange, quiet, and still, nothing like the roaring sea or the hot sun overhead. He lay on a narrow cot, his body weak but finally safe from the endless danger of the ocean. Around him, nurses moved quietly, tending to others who had been pulled from the water. The air smelled faintly of medicine and antiseptic, a sharp contrast to the salty sea breeze he'd known for so long. As the days passed, Tommy's strength returned bit by bit, but his mind wrestled with memories that refused to fade. He replayed the endless hours in the water, the faces of those lost, the moments of terror and hope. Every sound, every movement brought flashes of the nightmare he'd survived. Then the news came. Whispers began among the men, quiet talks about what the USS Indianapolis had been carrying. Tommy heard the rumors, the half-spoken truths. They had been delivering parts of something no one had talked about openly before: the atomic bomb, the very weapon that was about to change the course of the war forever. The secret mission, the rush, The silence, it all made sense now, but the revelation brought a new weight. They had carried the future in their hands, only to be left stranded and forgotten. As the story reached the public, another truth surfaced. The Navy had delayed sending help. Communication failures, confusion, and perhaps fear had meant days passed before a search was launched. Survivors like Tommy felt shock, anger, and a deep sense of betrayal. How could they be forgotten like this? The questions grew louder when Captain Charles McVeigh, the commander of the Indianapolis, was court-martialed. The trial was painful to hear. The captain was blamed for the sinking, held responsible for not avoiding the submarine attack. Tommy was called to testify. Standing before the court, he spoke honestly but with a heavy heart. He did not blame Captain McVeigh for their suffering. Instead, he spoke of war's cruel nature, the chaos, the unpredictability, and the impossible choices men had to make. "It was the war that did this to us," Tommy said quietly, "not Captain McVeigh." Despite the court's judgment, many survivors carried their own private battles. Guilt shadowed Tommy. Guilt for those who didn't survive. For moments he wished he could change. The trauma of those days at sea was a burden he knew would never fully leave him. Yet, amid the pain, there was a growing determination. Tommy and others vowed to remember those lost, to tell their story honestly and clearly. Theirs was a story of survival, but also of sacrifice and endurance. The war was ending, but for the survivors of the Indianapolis, the fight to heal and to be heard was just beginning. Many years had passed since that terrible summer of 1945, but the memories stayed with Thomas Albrecht. Now an elderly man, his hair silver and his steps slower, Tommy stood quietly before the USS Indianapolis Memorial. The cool breeze carried the scent of the sea, and the sun warmed his weathered face. The memorial was a place of peace, yet for Tommy, it was also a place of deep reflection. Names etched in stone reached out like whispers from the past. He traced his fingers gently over the names of his lost friends: Luis Ortega, Jackie Nguyen, Lieutenant Rains. Each name brought back a flood of memories, some painful, some filled with the small moments of hope and friendship that had helped them survive those dark days. Ortega's calm voice despite the pain he carried, Jackie's hopeful eyes as he clung to the promise Tommy made to tell his mother what happened. Rains's steady leadership, even as he struggled to hold everyone together. They were not just names on a memorial, they were pieces of Tommy's heart. He knelt down and laid a small folded letter beside the stone for Jackie. For decades Tommy had carried that promise silently. Now he had finally put words to paper. A letter he hoped would bring a measure of comfort to Jackie's mother. It spoke of her son's courage, of the friendship they had shared, and of the hope that someday those memories would ease the pain of loss. Tommy's voice, soft but clear, filled the quiet air as he spoke aloud, though no one else was near. "We weren't heroes," he said, voice thick with emotion. "We were just boys trying to live another day." That truth had stayed with him all these years. They had not chosen glory, only survival. And through that survival they carried the stories of those who could not. The years had changed Tommy's face, but they had not broken his spirit. He felt the weight of those days at sea, the loneliness, the fear, but also the strength born from the bond shared among those lost souls. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the memorial, Tommy stood and took a deep breath. He felt a quiet peace in this moment, a connection to the past and a hope that the world would remember the true cost of war, not in headlines or battles but in the lives of ordinary men who faced the impossible. With one last look at the memorial, Tommy turned and walked slowly away, carrying with him the stories of the USS Indianapolis, haunted but not broken. If you're proud to be American and want to honor the bravery of our true war heroes, hit that subscribe button, because these powerful stories deserve to be remembered.